Tonight on News 5 Live, the startling state of the economy. Tourism numbers way down, economic activities decline for a fourth consecutive quarter. With 7 weeks without new COVID-19 cases, the Director of Health Services focuses on the way forward. 6 persons, including 4 Asian businessmen, are busted by Coast Guard patrol near Orange Point in Toledo District with uncustomed goods. Also in the South, PG police move in on a trio promoting gang activity in a surreal Facebook Live video. And a late afternoon attempted robbery at a paint store on Douglas Jones. The armed robbers escape, leaving slippers behind. Details of these stories and more coming up in tonight's newscast.
In these challenging times,
evening. Welcome to News 5 Live for Wednesday, May 27th. I am Marlene Cuellar. A disturbing video surfaced on the internet on Tuesday night. Its contents sent chills all around. 3 men are seen brandishing a high-powered firearm and a handgun, and then heard making sinister threats. The live images caught the attention of the police, and the trio and the firearms were traced to a house in Punta Gorda. The men, who are known gang members, were arrested. But what about the firearms? Here is News 5's Hipólito Novello with this report.
A menacing video, chilling and antagonizing. Mark Anthony went Facebook Live with 2 other men at a residence in Punta Gorda. 3 men, one had his face covered, all smoking weed and passing what appears to be a high-powered firearm and a handgun to each other like it was a blunt. But the public was watching.
Man,
Who would have viewed?
who would have viewed episode? Who would have viewed this thing out?
Who would watch it, dog?
The authorities were informed of the video immediately, and PG police tracked down these suspecting gang members. Police in PG were not having it. They zeroed in into the location and made arrests. Commissioner of Police Chester Williams says that the firearm that these men were brandishing were located. However, they were fake.
It turned out that both firearms are imitated firearms, and therefore they are not real. But the fact remains still that these persons were seen in this video brandishing these 2 firearms and were making threats. Based on that, the 3 subjects of the video are in police custody, and members of the anti-gang task force are in the process of interviewing them. We had to act quickly because, just like the public, we did not know that the firearms were not real. And so it was important for us to be able to get to them and try as best as we can to remove the firearms out of their hands. And again, the public were very much supportive and gave us good information that led us to the 2 firearms, and it turned out that they were imitation firearms.
What type of firearm are they imitating?
Well, one of them appeared to be an M4 carbine imitation, and the other one is like a 25 pistol imitation.
On his Facebook page, Anthony claims to be the leader of the Blood Gang. The men, Williams says, will face gang-related charges.
We are looking at charges of probably using a video recording to promote gang activity. So that is what we're doing, or might even look at inciting public terror based on their behavior in the video. So the matter is currently being dealt with.
Can you confirm that these 3 persons are member of gang? I know one of them has on his Facebook, leader of the Blood Gang.
Yes, actually, yes, they appear to be gang members, and as you said, even on one of them own Facebook page, he's professing to be a member of a gang. So those are information the police will be able to use in order to prefer charges against them in respect to using the video to promote gang activities.
Reporting for News 5, Hipólito Novello.
According to Commissioner of Police Chester Williams, while the guns turned out to be fake, the fear instilled by the men on the public is very real. He says that policymakers will need to take a closer look at retracing the importation of imitation firearms, as these are also used to terrorize members of the public.
We're seeing more and more imitated firearms looking or resembling the real firearms. And so it is something that we need to look at to address, because if someone were to come and hold you up with one of those guns, you will not be able to know that it is imitation. And you for sure will be in fear and will surrender whatever it is being asked of you to surrender. And so we need to look at our laws to see how we can restrict the importation of these firearms, these imitation firearms into our country.
6 persons, including 4 Asian businessmen, were taken into custody on Tuesday morning after being busted by a Coast Guard patrol near Orange Point in the southern waters of Toledo. Xuan Ma, Jin Fu Huang, Ivan Pena, Leslie Williams, and 2 others were spotted by BDF personnel not far from the Sarstoon Forward Operating Base, where they rendezvoused with a Guatemalan vessel that had crossed over into Belizean waters. Noticing something suspicious, the BDF alerted their Coast Guard counterparts in Barranco, and a team was promptly dispatched to pursue the launch. While the captain of the vessel and his passengers attempted to evade the patrol, they were eventually caught near Orange Point with a large quantity of shrimp and a case of Corona beer. They were taken to Punta Gorda town, where they were quarantined while awaiting charges. But tonight, there is a lot of chatter surrounding the actual whereabouts of the men, who some residents say have been set free. This afternoon, News 5 spoke with Commander Gregory Soberanis, who told us that the men had been surrendered to health and customs officials.
Yesterday, on the 26th of May, at approximately 11 o'clock, we, the Coast Guard, have a station in Barranco. That team that was in Barranco received a message from the Belize Defense Force team that is stationed at the Sarstoon Forward Operating Base. The information that the Coast Guard team received was that the BDF team, being vigilant in that Sarstoon border area, observed movement of 2 vessels, one vessel that came from Guatemala and one vessel that came from the Belizean side. What the Belize Defense Force team reported was that there was a link-up between these 2 vessels, with these 2 vessels. The link-up was made. The Guatemalan boat then returned to the Guatemalan side of the border, and the Belizean vessel then proceeded north in the direction of Punta Gorda. The Coast Guard team stationed at Barranco mobilized and eventually made an intercept at Orange Point, which is very close to Punta Gorda town. On board the vessel were 6 individuals, 4 Chinese descent individuals and 2 locals from Punta Gorda town. They informed the Coast Guard patrol that they were out purchasing shrimp. On board the vessel, there was a large white igloo icebox filled with shrimp and, ironically, a case of Corona, a beer. The vessel and individuals on board were then escorted to Punta Gorda town, where they were then handed over to Customs, Baja, and the Ministry of Health. We were informed that they were subsequently quarantined in Punta Gorda town. Currently, all 6 men are in quarantine by the Ministry of Health. We also know that there is an ongoing investigation by the Customs Department. Pending the outcome of that investigation, will determine what charges will be levied against these individuals.
According to Soberanis, the men were in a violation of a number of laws, including the fact that boat captain Leslie Williams was driving the boat with an expired license. The substantive charges, he says, will likely fall under the state of emergency regulations.
They were in possession of uncustomed goods. They had no permit. They were unable to provide any documentation to show that they were authorized to conduct such a transaction. So, in our view, they were in possession of uncustomed goods. Secondly, the captain license had expired. So they were operating with an expired captain license. The captain license had expired from the 23rd of April of this year. All right? And of course, because it was in our view, a non-essential movement, they are in violation of the current SOE. So we see several infections that occurred with this particular incident.
Turning to COVID-19, tonight the news is that there are still no new cases of the virus. But the repatriation of Belizeans is running into trouble as soon as it started. Over the weekend, 10 Belizeans made it back home after spending 72 days at sea on a Royal Caribbean ship. But a number of other Belizeans are trapped and not being allowed to re-enter via the northern or western borders. These Belizeans include students who could not return home by the time the government locked down the international airport and closed the borders. About 2 weeks ago, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Health provided a microsite for Belizeans to access request forms to allow for their repatriation. After filling out the forms, a number of displaced persons made their way to Cancun and Chetumal without getting the requisite clearance from the three ministries. So now, they're stuck so close to home. Director of Health Services Dr. Marvin Manzanero explains what is happening.
Some, as we understand it, are either at the border entry point in Chetumal or somewhere on their way to the nearest border entry point, primarily through the northern border more than the western one. The intention had been that it's going to go through a planned process. So I know some people filled in the form and started their departure on their way to Belize. Has not been the intention. The intention is to do it in a planned program way. Fill in the form and await clearance from the three different entities, as I said, Foreign Affairs, Immigration, and the Ministry of Health, so that we are adequately prepared in terms of where we're going to place you. And for those people who are ill and had to seek medical care out of the country, then those will go through a separate process, but they still have to fill in the adequate paperwork and inform the relevant ministries before they are allowed back in.
So while many Belizeans are trapped in neighboring Guatemala and Mexico, 57 persons who crossed into Belize in recent days are in quarantine. The list includes the 10 Belizeans who work in the cruise ship industry and returned to Belize over the weekend, as well as those persons who were caught illegally entering the country. Dr. Manzanero says that a few of the quarantined persons had also successfully completed repatriation forms, which were approved.
57 is the last note I have, but only 20 of those have come through the process that we have tried to establish with Foreign Affairs, Immigration, in conjunction with the AG's office, which is people would routinely come in through an approved entry point and go into a mandatory quarantine. That's 20 of those 57 are in that process. Well, it can be a little bit more than that because I'm not counting all those who are or have been out of the country for medical reasons. The cancer patients are being quarantined at home, but they are counted in that 57 number that we gave.
So what accounts for the others, the 37?
Illegal entry, cancer patients, the 20 that have come into the border process are the Mennonites who came in through the northern border. They are closer to completing their 14-day cycle. And the 10 that arrived on Saturday from a cruise ship, one single cruise ship.
There's more news after the break, so stay tuned.
Sip, sip.
Earlier today, Financial Secretary Joseph Wade sent out a circular reiterating government's position on the foregoing of increments for public officers. In the bulletin, which was issued to the Office of the Governor General, Chief Justice, the Auditor General, CEOs, and heads of department, the FinSec reminded that the increments will be foregone until retirement, with the understanding that if and when the economic circumstances of government improves ignorantly at a future date, government is committed to revisit its position. The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service Union have been locking horns over the issue of increments, and despite meeting with the Prime Minister, an agreement is yet to be met. In the circular, the FinSec also clarifies that the approval granted by Cabinet for the quantum for the foregone annual salary increment. COVID-19 has not only overwhelmed health systems and claimed the lives of 100,000 people, but it also continues to halt economies. An IMF blog post in April states that the growth in the region is projected to contract by 6.2% in 2020, stating, quote, "This would be the deepest recession in more than half a century," unquote. And some countries may already be in a recession or heading there. COVID-19 may have only compounded the economic crisis that already existed. So what about Belize? Well, the Statistical Institute of Belize is saying tonight that Belize just recorded its fourth consecutive quarter of economic downturn. By February, the third downturn was recorded. And for a country to be experiencing recession, there must be at least 2 consecutive quarters of a decline in its production of goods and services. When asked about that today, the SIB says it is not their call to make.
How much more quarters do you guys record or observe a contraction to deem it an economic recession?
For us, I think the definition that is typically used is 2 consecutive periods, if I'm not mistaken, of decrease. For us at the Statistical Institute, it is not our job necessarily to decide whether the country is in a recession or not. I guess we leave that to those at the central bank. But I think the definition that is widely used is 2 consecutive periods of decline, yeah. And at the moment, we're on our 4th.
The tourism industry collapsed in a matter of days as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As far as it is known, one major airline, Southwest, is not scheduled to fly to Belize until next year. When Belize closed its border points and the PGIA, the visitors stopped coming and the hotels have had to lay off staff and close their doors at the height of the tourism season. But it's not unique to Belize. It's being felt all over the world. But the economic shocks will be felt longer and harder in countries like Belize that are reliant on tourism, which accounts for about 45% of the GDP and unemployment. For the first quarter of this year, with most of the decline in the tertiary sector coming towards the end of March, Belize recorded declines in its peak tourism season for overnight and cruise arrivals. Today, the SIB shared the recent stats for the first quarter for the tertiary sector with a look at how the tourism sector performed in the first 3 months of this year.
Production within the tertiary sector decreased by 3.3% or $15.2 million, totaling $440.2 million per tertiary industry. Within this sector, we saw a decline in the hotels and restaurants industry by 22.5% or $9.8 million, bringing the total for that industry to $34 million. Transportation and communication activities decreased by 8.6% or $5.8 million, totaling $61 million. Wholesale and retail trade activities also decreased by 0.2%, totaling $149 million. The only sector asserting positive pressure on GDP is government services, which increased by 4.1% or $3.5 million, totaling $87 million. due to normal annual increments. Within hotels and restaurants, overnight visitors to the country decreased by 22%, along with hotel room revenue, which fell by 19%, and cruise visitors to the country also decreased during the quarter by 24.9%. In examining tourist arrivals were down as the total number of overnight visitors to the country decreased from roughly 158,500 visitors in the first quarter of 2019 to 123,300 visitors in the same period of 2020. There were approximately 24,000 less American tourists, 3,800 less Canadian tourists, and roughly 3,400 less tourists visiting from Europe. Cruise passenger arrival dropped 24.9% as a total of 31 less ship calls were made during the first quarter of 2020. And just to recap, for the first quarter of 2020,
the numbers from the Statistical Institute of Belize show that the economy shrunk considerably. It declined by 4.5% in the first quarter of this year. Prices of goods and services remain pretty much the same when compared to last year. And domestic imports and exports are down by 30.4% and 2.7% respectively for the month of April. That's a summary of the latest report coming out of the Statistical Institute of Belize for the first quarter of 2020. Here's Andrea Polanco's story with a look at how some of the sectors performed for the first 3 months of this year.
Belize's economy declines for a fourth time in a row, but this most recent decline in the first quarter of this year is the first decline of a first quarter since 2014. According to the SIB, the overall production of goods and services fell by 4.5% in the first 3 months of this year when compared to the same period last year. The total value of goods and services fell by $33.4 million across all sectors, which resulted largely from drought and COVID-19 restrictions. In the primary sector, agriculture, hunting, and forestry contracted, as well as fishing. In the secondary industry, production outputs fell by 13% overall, recording declines in manufacturing, electricity, and water, as well as construction.
In terms of agriculture, banana output decreased marginally by 0.3%, from 26.3 thousand metric tons in the first quarter of 2019 to 26.2 thousand metric tons in the first quarter of 2020, as the industry tried to recover from low production figures during 2019 due to unfavorable weather conditions. In the case of sugarcane production, dry weather resulted in underdeveloped sugarcane. This decreased sugarcane deliveries by 20.7%, from 760.8 thousand metric tons delivered in quarter one of 2019 to 602.9 thousand metric tons delivered in quarter one of 2020. Since 2015, citrus fruit production has been steadily declining during the months of January to March. In 2020, production declined by 3.7%, or 2.2 thousand metric tons when compared to quarter one of 2019. Due to unfavorable weather conditions, the fruit was not ready for harvest and will mature later in the season. Within the manufacturing and mining industry, sugar production suffered from a decline in sugarcane deliveries. Also, increased mud levels in the cane resulted in a slower grinding rate, which then requires more effort to extract sugar. This, coupled with stoppage for factory maintenance, contributed to decreased sugar production. Sugar production in the first quarter of 2020 stood at 55.3 thousand metric tons, compared to 2019, where 84.5 thousand metric tons of sugar was produced. Beverage production declined by 1.2%. This came as a result of a 4.6% increase in soft drink production and a 4.4% decline in beer production during the period.
In trade, imports are down for January to April of 2020 by $14.5 million, or 2.4% for the same period of 2019. The SIB reports that for April of this year alone, Belize imported $102.6 million in goods. which is $44.8 million, or 34% less for the same month of last year. Exports in January to April of 2020 were $110.1 million, down by $30.3 million, or 30.3% for the same period. In April, the exports stood at $47.6 million, which represents a decrease of 2.7%. Again, COVID-19 and the drought were major factors in the movement of merchandise.
A substantial decline in fuel expenditure in April of this year was the main reason for this downturn in imports. The mineral fuels and lubricants category, which consists all of our major fuels, including premium, regular, diesel, and kerosene, a category which accounts for 13% of all imports, fell considerably by $23 million to $73.6 million over the 4-month period, a drop due almost entirely to April's plunge in fuel imports. One should note that notwithstanding the current lower world market prices for fuel, a decline of this magnitude was the direct impact of COVID-19. For in April of this year, where Belizeans were at their least mobile, due to restricted movements in accordance with the state of emergency, only a small shipment of regular fuel was imported into the country, as the demand for fuel by local consumers simply was not there. Chemical products, which accounted for 10% of all imports, rose by $3.3 million to $56.5 million, as the period saw boosted imports of fertilizers, along with hand sanitizers and disinfectants, the latter most likely linked to the demand of a new COVID-19 reality. We observed that decreased earnings from mainly sugar, citrus products, and crude petroleum led to this decline over the period. For whereas we had slightly improved earnings coming from bananas and marine products, along with marked increases in the sales of red kidney beans and molasses, these gains were not enough to offset the downturn in overall export earnings. Our top export, sugar, experienced the greatest loss over the 4-month period, with earnings from sugar falling substantially by 41%, or $18.7 million to $26.4 million, as exported quantities of this commodity dropped by more than a half due to the impact of last year's drought on our sugar cane. Earnings from citrus products went down by almost 37%, or $9.2 million to $15.9 million, as the country exported smaller quantities of mainly orange concentrate, grapefruit concentrate, and grapefruit oil. Furthermore, having had no shipments of crude petroleum since the start of this year, earnings from this commodity declined by $6 million, which was the value of one shipment of crude petroleum which was exported in January of last year.
Consumer prices remained largely the same for April of this year when compared to prices for goods and services in April 2019. There is a mere 0.02% decrease from April of last year to this year's April. A closer look at the figures show that transportation costs were down, but other prices were up.
Looking at the major categories affecting the inflation rate, the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel had an increase of 0.8%. The food and non-alcoholic beverages category had a decrease of 0.5%. The transport category had a decrease of 0.9%. And now I must say that the transport category was the main category exerting downward pressure on the overall consumer price index. And for the purpose of this presentation, we grouped the remaining goods and services into the all other categories of goods and services, which had an increase of 0.2%. Now that we have mentioned the 4 major categories affecting the inflation rate, it can be clearly seen that the decrease in the transport category was partially offset by the increase in the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel. And the decrease in the food and non-alcoholic beverages category was partially balanced by the all other categories of goods and services, which had a decrease of 0.2%.
Reporting for News 5, I'm Andrea Polanco.
The remains of a person were found on Wednesday in Gardenia village in rural Belize, and according to reports, the grim discovery was found by a mechanic who was cutting some bush sticks in the area. Police were alerted and scenes of crime personnel collected the remains, which have been taken to the National Forensic Science Service for testing and investigation. Around 3:30 this afternoon, there was a daring attempted robbery at a paint store at the corner of Douglas Jones and Cran Streets on Northside Belize City. At least 2 brazen armed robbers entered Imasa Paints, which is one of 2 businesses housed at the property. Police responded shortly after, but by then the robbers had already fled the scene, leaving their slippers behind. Fortunately, we are told that the thieves left empty-handed. Surveillance cameras on the property reportedly captured the incident. Around 4 p.m., the employees closed the business as scenes of crime personnel retrieved the surveillance footage. Residents in the area recount what they saw when they came outside.
We came outside and we saw the police officers over by the paint store. We saw slippers on the ground. I don't know what really happened, but it's very concerning because we don't usually see those type of stuff around here.
It's a robbery. You afraid now?
Of course.
Investigators have identified one suspect in connection to the brutal murder of Abner Novello. The victim was found with chop and gunshot wounds on a farm off the San Antonio Road in Orange Walk. His knees were slashed and his right arm had been severed. He was the caretaker of the farm where he was found. Whoever wanted him dead knew he was there at that specific time. Investigators believe that Novello knew his murderer or murderers. There are no witnesses to the crime, but according to Commissioner of Police Chester Williams, investigators are zeroing in on a suspect.
The family remains in communication with the police, yes. I'm not going to go to the extent of that cooperation, but they are in dialogue with the police.
Are you able to say what makes the investigators believe that this might be a drug deal gone wrong?
Well, yes, we do believe that it might have some drug relation. So we're looking at it from that angle as well.
In terms of suspects, I know Mr. Maivet yesterday said that no suspects or no motive have been established, but are you able to say if there were more than 2 persons that did this and that they knew each other and that they knew he was there at that time?
There is a particular suspect that we're looking at this time, but we have not been able to get anything substantial on him to be able to bring him in for an interview.
Rudolph Rodriguez lost his life on Tuesday afternoon following a hit-and-run incident on Saturday night along the old Northern Highway. The 68-year-old was struck by a Chevy Trailblazer and left for dead. Despite being transported to the KHMH, Rodriguez succumbed to his injuries. This morning, News 5 spoke with Commissioner of Police Chester Williams, who said that a suspect is presently in police custody, but that the individual is not cooperating with investigators. According to Compo Williams, samples have been taken from the vehicle for DNA testing to determine whether the specimen, which appears to be human hair and pieces of human skin, belonged to Rodriguez.
From my discussion with Mr. Myers, who is in charge of Ladyville, he have briefed me that, yes, they did found a vehicle that is suspected to have been involved in a hit-and-run accident. But the vehicle was found a whole day after the accident occurred. And as a result of that, the person who the police believed was the driver of the vehicle when the accident occurred, the police cannot take a blood or urine sample from that person because it is not per se that he was caught driving the vehicle at the time the accident occurred. To take a blood or urine sample a day later will not give you anything useful. And that's the reason why there have been no blood or urine sample taken. The person who is suspected to have been the driver of the vehicle at the time is in police custody and he's not cooperating. Nonetheless, the vehicle, from what the police observed, do have some dents and what appeared to be human hair or pieces of human skin was found in the dents and as well as in the cracks on the windshield. And so the scenes of crime person have lifted those samples from the vehicle, and that will be packaged, and we'll also be getting, during the post-mortem, samples for DNA testing. So what we'll be doing, we'll be sending what we found on the vehicle, along with the sample that we'll get from the deceased, to the DNA lab for testing to confirm or refute that that was a vehicle that had hit and caused the fatal injuries to the person in question. So that is where that investigation is. I have directed Mr. Myers, though, to go and see the family and give them a briefing. And let me say categorically that the person of interest is of no relation to Minister Castro, and I do not know him to be a person of influence.
After the break, we'll have an update on the unemployment relief program and the future of random testing for COVID-19.
Throughout this time of
As many as 83,000 persons applied for the unemployment relief by the time the portal closed. A second round of payment is being prepared for persons eligible to receive financial assistance from the Social Security Board under the COVID-19 Unemployment Relief Program. Chairman Dr. Colin Young told News 5 today that almost 43,000 applications were approved by the Oversight Committee and 40,000 have been paid by the SSB. The latest figures are as of last Friday, when the program reached a $10 million disbursement milestone.
As of the 22nd of May 2020, that's last Friday, SSB has received a total of 42,828 transactions for processing for the COVID-19 unemployment relief program. Of that amount, the board has paid 40,104, or 94% of all of the transactions received from the task force. You'll note that that leaves about 2,724 transactions that have been rejected. And the reason for rejections are because people have wrong names, incorrect bank account information. In some cases, bank accounts that they wrote down on their forms have been dormant or have been inactive. And so as a result, those transactions come back to Social Security, and then the staff then has to take a number of actions to try to contact those persons to get them to correct that information so that the payments can go through. So in terms of dollar figure, as of last Friday, then a total of $10,845,602 has been paid out to those persons.
There have been complaints from recipients that the second tranche of payment has been slow to come by, since many received their first $150 payout back in April. According to Dr. Young, the SSB is only following the directives of the financial experts put in place to lead the program by the National Oversight Committee.
Some persons are already receiving their second disbursements. Those persons who received payments between April 9th and April 30th, they would now start to see their second disbursements showing up in their account. As you know, the instructions to pay come to SSB, and then SSB pays according to the instructions that is received by the czars in this particular case. So when the instructions were received to start the second disbursements, then SSB complies. Our role, or SSB's role as part of this, is to deliver the payments to the person's accounts. And those persons are submitted in list form by the czars. As it relates to SSB, I understand from the staff that this is a Herculean effort on the part of the Social Security staff to be dealing with this number of transactions in addition to the normal transactions that the Social Security Board would do on a day-to-day basis. So the fact that they have successfully paid 94% of the persons whose names and accounts were submitted to the board, or some 40,000 plus persons, I think is a testament to the hard work that they're doing at the Social Security Board. I know from the point of view of people who are still waiting for their payments, that's small consolation, because I am certain that people are in need of this money. And that is why I think we are continuously looking at how to improve the speed in terms of getting persons this relief.
The Ministry of Health is scaling down its random testing for the coronavirus now that it is in week 7 without any new cases. The ministry has been randomly swabbing and testing persons, specifically frontline workers from healthcare facilities, immigration and customs officers at entry points, as well as police, to check if there are any positive cases of COVID-19. So far, those tests have all returned negative, and the recommendation is for the scaling down on the number of testing. Director of Health Services, Dr. Marvin Manzanero, speaks about the testing approach going forward.
Still ongoing. Since the last cases we reported more than 6 weeks ago, we have duplicated the number of tests that have been done, and almost all of that has been as a result of random sampling. But we are having what's called a low yield or no yield even, because we are not finding any cases. So we're going to scale down number of testing days from 3 to 2 as of next week. We are still going to continue to actively look for people who may have any severe acute respiratory illness or any of those symptoms that have been described for COVID-19. Those patients will be swabbed and samples checked. But in terms of the random sampling, since we are not finding any kits, we may have to scale that down.
And we have enough kits in place to do these testing. Should the need arise that there needs to be more testing on these people?
We have the ability now to do close to 6,000 tests, if not more, with some reagents still pending to come in. But it doesn't mean that you just will squander your 6,000. Remember, you have to potentially do or scale up your testing once you identify any more cases. As I said, some countries in the Central American region have expressed that they are running low or they don't have supplies to be doing PCR testing. Same concern has been expressed by Caribbean counterparts, so that routinely they are not recommending that we do random sampling in people who are asymptomatic. And that's part of why we are scaling down our testing approach.
In the last 24 hours, the U.S. is reporting 5,480 new cases with 256 deaths. Closer to home, neighboring countries such as Guatemala and Mexico are spiking. Mexico recorded 3,455 new cases. Honduras documented 212 and Guatemala reported 194. In Belize, the mortality rate as a result of COVID-19 is at 11.2%, but the death rate is 5 per million, while Mexico is 63 and the U.S. is 305. Dr. Marvin Manzanero says that the government remains concerned about the spiking cases in the region, particularly in Mexico, where in the last 24 hours, 501 persons died as a result of the virus. Dr. Manzanero says that the ministry believes that the next potential case will be imported from Mexico via an illegal entry.
Other than the smaller Caribbean, some of the Caribbean islands, English-speaking, having no active cases or no recent cases, almost all other countries in the region are continuing to show spikes. Even Costa Rica, even though their numbers are much smaller than the other countries, but Honduras, Nicaragua, if you go back to how they were 1 week ago and where they are now, it's 10 times the reported official numbers at least. Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador are expected to continue to rise, as is Mexico. With Mexico perhaps taking one more month before they actually plateau. Yesterday they had 501 deaths. That's the most amount of people reported dying as a result of COVID-19 in a space of 24 hours. So those numbers cannot just be shelved. We need to review them on a daily basis. Provided we are not having interaction with people coming from those countries, we should be able to keep our cases the way we are, or the current situation of the epidemic for the Belize context. But we are assuming that that's where the next potential case or cases can come from, is that interaction, particularly the illegal ones. The legal ones is what we're trying to do in a controlled kind of fashion to avoid that the potential problem that you won't be able to take a grip on early on.
In a one-on-one interview, the Director of Health Services said that the good public health measures installed from the onset of the crisis has helped with the containment of the virus. These measures, including the lockdown of the borders and closing of the airport, as well as the state of emergency and adherence by the Belizean people, have kept Belize for up to 7 weeks without new cases. But going forward, Dr. Manzanero says that residents must remain health conscious.
From the health standpoint, is trying to get people to understand that now we are living under new norms, that the frequent hand washing, the social, physical distancing that we have been advocating for should remain. That masks, even though you are right, it may be for the people who are symptomatic, and you may argue that we don't have any case. But I think it's a preparation process, because once we start having more cases, or if we ever go to a community ongoing transmission, then the use of the mask will be playing a vital role, especially if you have asymptomatic carriers. So I think it should be a preparation process for everybody. The message needs to continue to be, and this is like you started talking widely about seatbelts to prevent further road traffic injuries. When you started to use the notion of condoms and HIV, it's the same thing here. The measures that we are talking about should be part of the new norm. If we go about our business assuming that anybody who we meet on the street is a potential COVID-19 case for the next 2 years, then I think that should pretty much allow us to internalize the message and should make sure that we are taking the necessary precautions on an individual and on a family basis.
When we come back, the rate of crime during the state of emergency. Is it up or down?
Nestle. Start healthy, stay healthy.
Last Friday, Mark Neal, the owner of Body 2000 Gym, appeared in a magistrate's court along with 4 others to answer charges related to violations of the state of emergency regulations. Today, he invited us to the fitness center here on Coney Drive, where he has since retrofitted the facility to accommodate clients under the social distancing protocols. Despite his efforts and those of other fitness clubs across the city, gyms remain closed until further notice. That's because exercise in these facilities have not been approved by the Attorney General and the relevant authorities. Like others in the fitness business, Neal says he's taking a serious hit financially.
The whole thing about Body 2000 have more than enough people, more than enough size, I would say, to meet the requirements that the government asks for. Basically, as you see, we mark off everything 7 feet apart, not even 6. Beside the treadmills and the rowing machines and different things, we do all our markings and judgment to basically the requirements what they ask for. Spray, the hand sanitizing, the 6 feet apart, we have all the signs and stuff like that. So my issue with the government, why they don't open the gym. Just last night I was watching the news with Mr. Manzaro. He said basically Belizeans are prone to the virus due to the fact they have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and they need to work out. So if they need to work out, why the gym is not open? And that's my main issue, what's going on right now. BL call, WASA calling, Digicel calling, all of them calling. So when they call me and ask me, Mr. Neal, well, you need to pay this, I said, well, then we need to go ask the government. How could I pay anything when I doesn't have nowhere to make money or have nowhere to really sustain myself and, balance out myself? I have a lot of people that work here. You only have the cleaners, you have the front desk people, you have also trainers who depend on, coming here and train. These are personal trainers. They make their money also off of this. So you talk about a variety of people, not only my gym, you have all the gym that combines together, trying to have the government open the gym. Gym should be priority, part of the whole focus, because it's a healthy thing. You don't find no sick people in the gym.
Commissioner of Police Chester Williams says there are challenges to policing in the state of emergency. And despite a national curfew in place, the murder numbers remain pretty close to the stats from last year during the same period. Since last Friday, 3 murders have been recorded. Commissioner Williams told the press on Tuesday that they are monitoring crime closely, but the cops are not to be blamed for crimes being committed during this time.
Yes, we keep a close eye on the crime rate.
Because it would be a big fail if after all this state of emergency and this suspension of movement that we still end up with another record high murder year, close to record.
Jules, people have their own perception. Even if it is that we were to end up with under 100 murders this year, there are still going to be those who are going to say what they want to say. There are certain fractions of society that no matter what the police do, they will always have something negative to say. So we cannot operate with them in mind. I do believe that for the most part, the Belizean people appreciate the work that the police is doing. And when there is a high murder rate or crime rate, that should not be attributed only to the police or mainly to the police. That should be attributed mainly to the society. Because they're not the police raised them to become criminals. They're the homes that they grew up in, the society that tolerates them. So why should it be a failure on the police? If we look, have said before, look around us. Even in the SOE, the murder rate in Trinidad, Jamaica, and other Caribbean countries is still high. So we are doing well.
There's much more news after the break, so stay tuned.
Yeah, where you going?
You walk, my dog?
Yeah, at the car,
Everybody has that one loyal friend.
Brits, you could pick up my girl for me?
Check on, check on.
I could buy
Limited, a port with a global perspective.
45% of young people are consumers of tobacco products, be that cigarettes, vapes, electronic cigars, and even hookahs. And it is a concern for the World Health Organization going into this year's World No Tobacco Day. This coming Sunday, May 31st, the day is being recognized under the theme, Protecting Youth from Industry Manipulation and Preventing Them from Tobacco and Nicotine Use. During the Ask the Experts webcast today, Director of Health Services Dr. Marvin Manzanero was joined by the Executive Director of the National Drug Abuse Control Council, Esner Veas. While Veas was concerned about the strategies that manufacturers use to attract the youths to tobacco, Dr. Manzanero says that its abuse can cause lung complications, which can put a smoker in a predisposed position for COVID-19.
The tobacco industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that, based on the resources that they have, they use these resources to be able to attract young people in various different ways, in terms of their marketing strategies, in terms of their product handling, in terms of making sure that there is accessibility of these products to young people, as well as supporting other ventures such as sports, such as culture activities, education, and so forth. And that is the reason why we here at the National Drug Abuse Control Council are concerned specifically, because our young people are those that are more exposed, not only in terms of the consumption of tobacco, but also in terms of the consumption of more modern type of products such as electronic cigars, hookahs, chewable tobaccos, and all of these contribute to the deterioration of the health of our young population, and as well as the deterioration of the health of the wider population, including our adults.
People are saying that there is no suggestion and that there is no implications for COVID-19. Well, people who are heavy smokers have, we all know, lung damage. Even secondhand smoke produces lung damage that is a predisposing condition for anybody who gets COVID-19. So there is value. And even though it's World No Tobacco Day on Sunday, I also said that it has to do with what other things we may be smoking that cause lung damage. And I know people who want to talk about the issue of cannabis, but it's used in Belize and it has implications. It has damage. Some article there that mentions the benefit of cannabis and in COVID-19. Again, you have to look at the hard-based evidence, and anything that you smoke can cause potential lung damage and predisposes you to COVID-19.
We are a few days away from the official opening of the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. The outlook, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, shows some 13 to 19 storms, of which 6 to 10 could become hurricanes and 3 to 6 major hurricanes, which are of Category 3 or higher. NOAA forecasters say that the outlook is based on competing climate factors, citing the absence of the weather pattern El Niño, which suppresses hurricane activity, along with warmer than average sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. In this clip produced by the Weather Channel, the forecaster looks at what the prediction of a busy hurricane season may look like should the predictions come to pass.
Everybody wants to know, how busy is this hurricane season going to be, and how bad? Well, there's a difference, because how bad the season is determined by exactly where the storms go. But I think we're going to have a few more chances at them this year, because we are likely to have an average to above average season. Why? Mainly because of not having El Nino. Only about a 20% chance of having El Nino, warmer than average waters in the eastern Pacific. If that were to happen, that would lessen hurricane activity. Doesn't seem likely. So the absence of El Nino is critical, but the reason it's critical is not just because it can limit the overall number of storms, but especially strong as a signal in terms of how it can limit the number of major hurricanes. More major hurricanes are typical without El Nino. Look at all these past years where we had an average to above average number of major hurricanes. Most of those years are neutral years or La Nina years. And also, the Atlantic Gulf Caribbean water temperatures are pretty warm right now, and that could add more fuel to the Atlantic systems. Now, if storms do form close to home and come inland over the southeast U.S., we have wetter than average soils because of all the rain we've had so far this year. It's much wetter than average in this part of the country. Anything coming out of the Gulf or out of the Atlantic, even if it's a depression or storm, could be a flooding disaster. So we've got a kind of a target on our back here with the heavy rains that we've had. And then finally, the recent years with the trends of more intense, larger, and slow-moving storms is concerning. If we get more of these kinds of major hurricanes or former major hurricanes that strike land and are moving very slowly, then we have bigger chances of widespread wind and water impacts. Let's hope the storms that do form this year stay away from land.
The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season officially starts on June 1st and continues through to the end of November. The list of Atlantic storm names are Arthur, which has already formed and dissipated, Bertha, which is now a weakened tropical depression, Cristobal, Dolly, Edward, Faye, Gonzalo, Hannah, Isaias, Josephine, Kyle, Laura, Marco, Nana, Omar, Paulette, Renee, Sally, Teddy, Vicky, and Wilfred. And that's the news. Don't forget that tonight's broadcast is available in both text and streaming video at channel5belize.com. You can also connect with us on our Facebook page at News 5 Live. I'm Marlene Cuellar. Thanks for joining us, and from all of us here at News 5, please remember to wash your hands, keep your social distance, stay safe. Good night.